At the time of recording, Steamfest had just recently wrapped up, which had displayed a huge amount of free demos from creators of all genres. It was a refreshing catalog to browse compared to Steam's usual list of trending titles, which often consisted of an infinite library of dogshit bootlegs and porn games. And during this fest, I found a few gems that I've since wishlisted and am genuinely quite excited to see release. One of which I have been replaying over and over again, called Am I Nima? But why am I replaying a demo so many times? Aren't they only like half an hour? Well, yes, they typically are. But something about this one kept drawing me back in. And to my surprise, each new playthrough of this 45-minute demo yielded an entirely new experience. I found myself going back in for more details again and again, exploring alternate routes and dialogue options, trying to see what else the game had to offer. And I did not come away empty-handed. For just being a demo, this game was jam-packed, and I still don't feel like I found everything it had to offer. With each run, I found myself noticing new details that had slowly peeled back the curtain to a much deeper story. A story of loss, guilt, and grief. A story of a broken family and a mother's obsession with putting it back together. For those interested, I'll be presenting my theory at the end for what I think it all spells out in the event of a full release. But before we get into the meat of what this game is and why it's captivated me so strongly, I strongly encourage you to take an hour or so to download this demo off Steam and give it a play for yourself. It's totally free, and I'll even link it down below for quick access in the description. The feelings that I had playing through this game totally blind, discovering all of the new lore drops, connections, and conversations, each one felt like a major breakthrough. And I'd hate for you to potentially miss out on that and have it spoiled for you. So this is your last warning to go do that. With that out of the way, let's get back on track. Am I Nima is a psychological horror game about the Lee family, where you play as a young girl with no memory named Nima. You find yourself in a basement across from your mother, Annabelle, who seems to spend more time interviewing or testing you than actually checking on your health and happiness. With no sign of the rest of your family, and no memory of why you're here, you must struggle alone to unlock associations, memories, and connect dots through the words you collect to figure these things out for yourself. You can find new words and ideas by interacting with the world around you, such as things your mother shows you, objects you find in your room, or by combining existing vocabulary. But knowledge isn't enough. You need to use critical thinking to remember the way some of these concepts interact and what they implicitly mean, as well as literally. Follow these trails of thought. Combine older words with new ones to uncover new ideas as well as old memories. And when prompted, use the words you deem best fitting to respond. Every word you speak has potential consequences, ranging from exposition, gaining favor with your mother, or losing it. A further complication to all of this is that there are no reliable narrators in this story. You don't have much of your own memory to count on, and you're not sure if you can trust your own mother, and neither does the other voice you find yourself sharing a headspace with. In fact, this fragmented voice despises the woman across from you, actively encouraging you to trap her and even wishes for her death. In this game, your goals are multifaceted. You must simultaneously reforge your past from broken pieces of your psyche, sifting through contradicting testimonies and your own faded memories, all while trying to fit into the caricature of Nima. Learn what happened to Nima. Learn who Nima is. Learn the truth. In order to do this, we're going to have to comb over the details, and there are a lot of them within and between these story chunks, involving Nima's inner monologue, your mother's testimony, your secondary inner voices dialogue, as well as all of the raw information you encounter throughout the demo. I'll try to highlight the things that stood out to me as they were either repeatedly mentioned or bore some significant relevance to Nima and the overall story. For one, as I mentioned before, there is not a single reliable narrator in this entire story. And I'm not saying that to point it out as a fault. On the contrary, I applaud it as an effectively executed literary tool to keep us constantly guessing, paying particularly close attention to anything we're exposed to. We must, by our own efforts, collect and analyze evidence and snuff out inconsistencies in the narratives we are being told, both by our mother and ourselves. There are several examples of these contradictions that are actually demonstrated for us in the demo. One such example is during the first item test your mother gives you is a bowl of kanji. This itself gives us a clue into the background of the Li family, as kanji is a traditional Chinese dish of rice porridge. Not only that, we also glean from using certain words here of what an appropriate, or at least an important response looks like to Nima. Combining the words kanji and hungry gives us the word disgust, and choosing to use this word yields a disappointing but not unexpected reaction from your mother. She is a horrible cook.
You're a sad fuck.
Nima spits it out, unable to stomach the vile bowl of gruel. This is an instance where the way we act is consistent with what is expected of us. However, foregoing this route, we can instead use a word like the base ones we are given, like kanji or hungry. This results in Nima associating the bowl with a nutritious and delicious meal, and she scarfs it down to a painful degree. This shockingly positive response has the opposite effect on your mother this time, pointing out that you always hated my cooking. She's wary of you now, suspicious even, and begins to watch you much more closely. When using words, you will typically see one or two different chat boxes, one which is highlighted in green and one which is simply white. The green boxes I've found tend to be either markers that the story will progress through this dialogue option or will yield significantly useful information. If the box is white, however, it either means the train of thought does not lead very far, or is otherwise not very credible or useful information. Going back to the presented example, this dichotomy suggests that despite existing truths, like how Nima hates kanji, or at least hates the way her mother makes it, if we prompt her to respond in a particular way, Nima will act and believe as if that has always been true for her. This, to me, builds off the groundwork the game lays out for us at the beginning, that Nima is a blank slate, and that while there are truths to ourselves and our environment, certain things we believe can be molded or altered. Using this same strategy of combining words, it's not long before we're throwing our entire vocabulary at the wall to see what sticks. Every new word and every ding of the bell sends us back to the lab to mash words together to try and discover new ones. Also, I don't know what made the developer decide on the sound design for discovering a new word, but I swear to God, it is the most satisfying thing hearing that little desk bell ringing every time I find a new word. It's like a shot of dopamine injected directly into my brainstem. I have never felt so Pavloved so quickly in my entire life. Eventually, through this method, we discover some pretty consistent ideas that feel reliable. For instance, we learn through repeated mentions that Nima is in school, volunteered at a nursing home, and was a talented swimmer, which is also suggested by the several trophies that she proudly displays in her room. But we'll get to that later. For now, we're applying these methods of deduction and association in several stages of the demo. First and foremost, our initial interaction with our mother after we wake up. During our first interrogation with our mother, we don't have that many words or concepts yet to start off with, being only the words stranger, our own name, and mom. Very quickly, though, we begin to pick up new adjectives, nouns, and concepts that we can then combine to form ideas of Nima's attitudes towards those ideas. Before we know it, our library can expand to potentially dozens of different words. After the kanji is put aside, regardless of our response, our mom starts to ask us questions. Things like, what do you remember about the accident? And some new words come to light, albeit unwillingly. Most notably, one word, pain. Among the pain, we also get interjections from that second voice in our head, suggesting that she's lying to us and to simply cooperate long enough to make our escape. Our mother tells us we can ask her any questions we want, but unfortunately, we only get the chance to ask 3, because with each question, the pain increases, meaning that we only have so many chances to ask what we want before we black out. If there were any doubts, or if this wasn't clear, the voice makes this apparent. Choose your next words carefully. and I think it's safe to say that this advice can be applied across the entire game. Now, I know I explored the alternate options for dialogue with the kanji example earlier, but I mainly used that as a medium for explaining the ways some of the mechanics of the game worked with said prompts. Going forward, I'm going to narrow down the word usage very strictly, because as badly as I want to showcase what each unique word yields, if I do that, this video is going to be endless. Not to mention, I feel like overloading you with information probably wouldn't do either of us any good, because there are lots of instances where using some words just yields nothing at all, or at most is just Nima being silly, or a nerd. For this portion, I discovered 3 unique words that to me elicit the most potent responses possible for this section in terms of lore. The first word you can use here is any synonym for death. This prompts Nima to ask, "Did I die?" Your mother responds, "No, you were in a coma, but that's not important now." However, we still have 2 more questions. The next significant word here that can be used is fear. Nima says that "you scare me." She also asks, "Why aren't I in a hospital?" To which your mom replies, "They weren't giving you the care you needed. I had to take matters into my own hands." The voice in your head remains unconvinced by this answer. While this seems to build off her previous response, what does she mean by this? Keep this all in mind. We'll be able to better address this later on once we discover more words. For the last word, that in my opinion yields some of the greatest amount of information, both by itself and in combination with the previous 2 inquiries, is the word pain. Using the word that involuntarily keeps ringing through your head and your body invokes this response. "I remember you hurt me." This statement causes a visceral reaction in our mother, causing her to physically shake in her chair at our accusation. She admits she's been neglectful, but that things will be different soon. That doesn't mean I've ever actively wanted to hurt you. I don't know about you guys, but I'm raising a very suspicious eyebrow at her usage of both actively and wanted in this sentence. But moving on. And as badly as we may want to keep pressing these points further, 3 questions is enough to wear us out completely, resulting in us falling unconscious in the chair, and we are carried off in the arms of our mother into part 2 of the demo, the bedroom, where we get an absolute trove of both questions and potential answers. Upon waking up in the bedroom, we are greeted to a sprawling array of sources to look at, from our bed, plushies, posters, photographs, and more, all yielding several insightful words we couldn't otherwise obtain in the previous section. And again, I could go over all of these in depth, from the books on the shelf, our trophies, our pet goldfish, and whatever these tomato boy things are. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to write anything off. Everything we come across serves some sort of narrative importance. Even the pair of off-brand Crocs under our bed, which are named Brocs. However, again, if I did cover each and every sticky note, book, and wall poster in here, we'd be here all day, and I have a feeling that this recording is already going to be long enough. So, I'm only going to cover the big epiphanies that we get access to here. And sadly, as funny as he looks, Tomato Boy is not one of those epiphanies. Trust me, I tried looking, but personally I couldn't find anything on what they are or what they're even from. I have heard some references that they're some kind of pop culture icon in the Philippines, or maybe they're on a comic book. Hi, post-editing Snooshi here. So, from what I've found, Tomato Boy's sole purpose, at least as far as I can tell, is to just let you slam words into him to make variants of the word Tomato Boy. That is all. Do you see what I mean now when I say why I'm electing to leave certain trains of thought out of this essay? The first major revelation can actually be unlocked right off the start, and we get a pretty obvious hint as to how to unlock it. Life and fossil. Taking these words from objects around the room and combining them gives us a unique word that stands apart from all the others. Obsession. For the first time, and the only time in the demo, this word is locked. That means it cannot be combined with any other word we have, and using these specific 2 words is the only possible way to obtain it, at least insofar as I've found. But that's not all we get. A dialogue prompt opens up despite nobody having asked us a question, and we're able to drop this word into Nima's noggin. Doing so shows us this. We get a vivid flashback of a memory into Nima's past, one where she's home alone, her mom is at work, and it's a scorching hot summer day. Nima shuffles around the house, trying to find ways to cool off, wondering what she did wrong to deserve this loneliness. Suddenly, the door rings, and instead of her mom, it's an old woman. Not just any old woman, but her old friend Pearl. She's brought her sports drinks, cold food, and ice cream. No doubt a luxury for any little girl like Nima. We learn that Nima met Pearl while she was working at the retirement home, and that because she had to look after her mom, Nima had to stop working there. It seems now, though, that Pearl has come to visit. The roles of caretaker have switched. The two of them proceed to play mahjong and talk about how Nima's been. She remembers finding a fossil in the shale and showing it to Mom. How happy she was to have found something for her. Something to get her attention and maybe even earn her approval. But before she can say too much of this out loud, she stops herself and changes the subject. Nima and Pearl then make cookies together, and for the first time in a while, Nima feels saved. She feels happy. She wishes that she was there to save her now. And with that, the memory ends. This gives us an incredibly distressing look into Nima's life before the current events. You get a sense of intense loneliness, isolation, and a desperate need for companionship that seems to have been ripped away from her. The next major revelation we can easily obtain here is our trip to the aquarium with our dad. Combining other words we can find around the room, like dad with Nima, gives us sad. However, combining some concepts to try and learn more about our dad uncovers a tragic fact. Combining many words with dad gives us synonyms like grief, loneliness, but most telling of all, combining age with dad gives us death. This picture appears to be the last coherent memory we have of our dad before he died, and with it, we obtain a connection with something we'll be exposed to later, a plush shark toy that dad bought for us on that same aquarium trip. Nima associates the trip with words like happy and memory. In fact, it's one of the few instances that trigger this kind of vocabulary from her. This trip to the aquarium is a core memory for Nima, so keep it in mind as it will be a major focus point during the second interrogation. The last major revelation we can obtain here requires a little bit of digging. It comes from the closet, which is unfortunately locked with a word key, and we have forgotten the combination. Go figure. We can try various words like fish, Nima, open, and plenty of others, but only one word fits. And to find out what this word is, we need to dig a bit into Nima's past and what's important to her. Going back to the drawer, we take a look at the other photograph. This one shows a drawing of what looks like Nima and a pet fish. Combining the words we get from this photo gives us the name James Pond. Plugging the word pond into the lock opens it right up, and we're greeted with three things. Another rare-looking tomato boy figure, a poster of a boy who Nima can't recall whether they're her boyfriend or not, but we can ignore both of those. Our eyes are drawn to a diary. Upon opening this diary, we see this. Scrawled in a feral, obsessive scratching is the message, "Do not trust the woman. Kill her." Upon looking further beyond the scrawled omen, we can actually read legitimate diary entries underneath. After squinting and guessing at some of the words, we get two very telling and very sad diary entries from a younger Nima. The first one reads, "I think I might be a bad person. If you're a cop and you're reading this, please. I've been wanting new Brocs for so long, but I also know that we don't really have the money for that right now. Or like, ever really. So I might have reached into Pearl's purse and grabbed her wallet when she wasn't looking. I feel really bad, but Pearl always says I'm like a granddaughter to her, and that she would do anything for me. Anything. So maybe it's not that bad. By the way, I'm so sorry, Pearl." This explains the Brocs we found earlier under the bed, and also why they're associated with the word guilt. We bought them with money that was stolen from our friend Pearl back at the retirement home and from the memory. The next entry mentions Pearl again and reads as follows. Today was just another plain old boring day. Went to school, came home, made dinner, and cleaned the house. I think that I should be used to this by now, but it still feels unfair. All Mom does is fucking work. I don't even think I've seen her leave the basement this week. I get that her work is important, but I just wish that she would at least look at me. I don't even think she noticed that the house is clean or when there's food. All she notices is those dumb old rocks. I bet she wouldn't even notice if I were missing. Anyways, I've been trying these pills that Pearl gave me. Of course, Mom doesn't know about it, but every time I try to bring it up to her, she tells me, we'll talk later. So, yeah, I talked to Pearl instead. On this page, we see a circled indent of a teardrop that fell onto the page, further indicating that this was a deeply emotional and troubling entry for Nima. It paints a clearer picture to us of what her life was like with her mom for the summer, filled with loneliness, yearning, and frustration. No friends besides Pearl, and forced to cook and clean the entire house alone while her mother worked alone in the basement, constantly shooing her away whenever she tried to talk with her. And what's the mention with these pills? They are important, so remember them, as when I go over my theory later, they play a major key factor. And I am sorry, I have to apologize. I know I'm asking you to pin a lot of things into your brain for me, but I promise it's all going to circle back. If you saw the pincushion that is my brain after playing this demo, you would understand why I need to ask this of you. But moving on. But now, with every key clue that's been dug up from our bedroom, it's time to knock on the door for Mom and enter the final part of the demo, the second interrogation. After our mom sits down with us, we sit back down at the table, this time with no restraints. She asks us very calmly how we were and if we had any dreams, to which that voice in our head encourages us to lie to her. So we do. After some back and forth, our mom says that she's going to show us some items and wants us to essentially do the same thing we did with the kanji earlier, except this time, the items seem to harbor a much stronger sentimental value. The first item on this list should be familiar to us if we snooped around in the bedroom, a large shark plushie. While presenting you with the shark, you can respond once again in a myriad of ways, some that are helpful and others that are not so helpful. And when it comes to choosing which key associations to attribute to the shark, I have found 3 or 4 unique options to pick from. For our first 2 picks actually, they're extremely similar. We can either throw out the word love or a word that relates back to the aquarium. She talks about how she remembers the shark as a gift from Dad and expresses her excitement about the idea of returning. The second pick goes a lot further down this same road. Choosing the specific word grief, or synonyms, causes Nima to begin crying. She becomes overwhelmed with emotions and goes on about how she misses Dad. She misses her old life. She misses the yearly trips to the aquarium with her family, her whole family, together and happy again. She misses and yearns for what used to be, and now what will never be again. It's during this dialogue where our mother reaches over the table, forgetting any notion of being afraid of us, and embraces us. It's an incredibly heartfelt and moving exchange. If you've ever experienced a family member with dementia, or simply know enough about how watching somebody you love mentally slip away from you, you can feel that pain here during this rare moment of clarity and closeness between a mom and her daughter, a moment that makes the end of the demo that much more devastating. For our third candidate, choosing a word like pain, blood, or monster yields a very peculiar reaction that produces a response unique to any other dialogue in the demo. When prompted this way, Nima admires the shark, its strength, power, and ability to tear prey to pieces. We read this in that by now familiar squiggly text indicating that inner voice. I wish I could be like him. But notice something before we move on. Look up there at the left corner of the text box. It says you. It's not blank like it normally is with this voice indicating an internal monologue. Nima is saying this out loud. And our mother takes a very intense notice of this. So have we, as we're surprised ourselves and think, I wonder why I just said that. This suggests that a veil is thinning, and we have slipped up. This is the first and only instance, at least that I'm aware of, in the demo where that inner voice is ever spoken aloud. And it has some very troubling implications. What those implications are depend on what theory you believe. But there's one last word we can use, one that throws a proverbial wrench into every theory and idea I'd been constructing up to this point. And that word is fear. Run. Using the word fear has a polar opposite reaction to what would be expected of Nima. She freezes up, terrified of the predator now in front of her, as if it were alive and crouched to lunge at her at any moment, tearing her to pieces. Kill it. The voice inside us screams louder than ever before. Get that thing out of my sight. Eventually, the fear is so overwhelming at the mere sight of the most fearsome hunter the sea has ever known, and we pass out. Our mother promptly removes it from the table, muttering, "You used to love that shark." Moving on to the next object, we are put face to face with that dumb rock our mom obsessed over all summer. More specifically, a fossil. And here we finally learn the name of this paleontological impetus that has possessed our mother for so long. And it's a word that is probably one of the most important for the entire game. Marella splendens. But what is a Marella splendens? Well, the game gives us further words to associate with it, such as if you combine it with words like home, you get Burgess Shale. So of course I tuned into the TISM and went to Wikipedia to do a deep dive. And what did I find? A lot. The Burgess Shale is a deposit stretch spanning through British Columbia and contains tens of thousands of fossils, most notably and most numerously the Marella splendens. But what's particularly significant about these specimens is that many of them contain extraordinarily large amounts of well-preserved soft tissue, meaning things like skin, organs, or flesh. Excavated primarily by paleontologist Charles Walcott, he and his family extracted over 65,000 specimens, with roughly 25,000 unique samples of Marella splendens. It is widely considered one of the most significant sites for fossil recovery in the field of paleontology. This actually gives us some insight through the game, as it gives us a geographical location of the Lee family. They're Canadian, residing in Vancouver along British Columbia, or at least they used to live there before they moved. Okay, enough geeking out about rocks and Canadians, back to the video game. I've found that with this final item in the demo, we have three main ways to approach it. The first is to simply use a word like Nima or work. Words like this give us your work. Going with this choice progresses into a dialogue where repressed tempers and resentment boil to the surface, spiraling into an argument of accusations, blame, and disdain. Nima vents her frustrations at her mom for working so long and hard at that dumb rock while ignoring her all summer, feeling like she was robbed and reduced to a house slave. This argument ends with your mother giving up, stating, "You're not Nima. Nima would never act like this. Nima would never question me like this." She then carries your weak, emaciated body off to the bedroom and puts you to sleep. You wake up shortly after to your mother staring over you, having restrained you with ropes and other bounds, and muttering to herself that she didn't use enough anesthetic. She says not to worry though, it's not our fault. This hardly comforts us though, as she drives an ice pick into your eye socket, piercing your skull and severing your brain in half. The last words you hear are, "There's always next time." That heartfelt exchange over the shark didn't really last long. So let's try another word. One other word we can use that harbors a similar but more detailed answer comes from the prophetic word we unlocked if we paid attention to the scene transition from before. Combining the words life and fossil gave us obsession. And using this unique word gives us not your work, but your love. Nima states that the fossil is her mom's one true love. She goes into much more detail, criticizing her obsession with her work and that rock, blaming her for why she was in the river, that this was all her fault. Your mother states that you're lucky and that she's not overbearing, and how she was originally studying chemical engineering and dropped out to study paleontology. Hey ma, good for you, I'm glad you're independent and all that, but I'm literally starving to death over here. And I'm suffering from short-term memory loss. And with a stunning recollection of clarity, outlines all of her mother's faults to the events we're now going through. This exchange, while offering more exposition than the last, still ends the same way for us. The last unique word we can use does end slightly differently, but it still wins us a free lobotomy. That word is trapped. Here we get the enraged dialogue. Why would you show me this? This causes Nima to fly into an uncontrolled frenzy, screaming accusations, rocking in her chair, and most notably, while fighting an urge to take the fossil and bash her mother's skull in, a brief memory flashes through us. Reach across the table and pound that rock into her skull, just like what happened to us. Surprisingly though, that same otherwise violent voice actually urges us back, restraining us from acting on this impulse. So instead, we scream, we beg for help that our mother has us trapped in the basement, hoping a neighbor will hear us. However, nobody comes, and our mother lunges across the table to gag us while injecting a syringe into our neck. This once more ends the demo with our lobotomy. With all three of these endings, however, it doesn't end there. We swim for a while in darkness before we hear the familiar words, "Nima, is that you?" When the game fully releases, I theorize that gameplay-wise, it may act like a roguelite, where we inherit the past words, combinations, and knowledge of previous lives to improve subsequent attempts, where either we try to become Nima, become Mom's idea of Nima, our own idea of Nima, or follow the violent voice and betray our mother, escaping into the world and achieving freedom. And now finally, my theory in terms of story. It's currently a stretch due to the limited amounts of information I have access to in the form of a demo, but here it goes anyways. I'll split it up into two parts, trying to answer each one, with what happened to Nima in the past, and what is currently happening during the events of the demo. For what happened, Nima was swimming in the river of the Burgess Shale when she hit a rock and fell into a coma. Nima makes this claim saying she was hoping that bringing her mom another fossil would win her affection, or at least some attention. But the second voice interjects here, stating, "That's not why you were in that river." Note that it doesn't refute you for having been in the river, but rather just the reason we were in the river. My theory is that the reason we were in the river is because Nima was attempting to take her own life. My evidence for this claim is because if you mess around enough with words like grief, death, so on and so forth, you eventually get words like depression, but most damningly, pills. Mixing depression and the word pain gets cut, which suggests some very dark if not obvious implications. Applying depression to Nima gives us guilt. Applying depression to pills gets antidepressants, and applying antidepressants to Nima gets cure. If you remember back to the diary entries from before, Nima mentioned she was trying some pills that Pearl gave her. I think that it's a very reasonable assumption that these were antidepressants, and Pearl, recognizing Nima's situation, was trying to help her. Nima was severely depressed. She was separated from her friends from having to leave Vancouver, couldn't be on the swim team anymore as a result, so a source of both companionship and achievement was taken from her. She lost her dad, couldn't spend time with Pearl anymore, meaning she had lost virtually every support system she had, all except her mom. However, her mom began to neglect her, opting instead to obsess over a fossil instead of paying attention to her daughter, taking more pride in her work and accomplishments than anything else. This obsession forced Nima to drop what she was doing all summer, leaving the retirement home, unable to make friends, and instead of playing or enjoying her time off like any kid should, she had to play caretaker for her own mother. After Nima's attempt, she was left comatose in a hospital bed. We actually have a vague second memory of this during our first interrogation with Mom around the kanji question, where we recall, "You are trapped in an abyss, eyes shut and disconnected from your brain. You can feel your mom was holding your hand." When we encounter it the first time, it doesn't really make any sense to us. This sounds exactly like it was recalled from the perspective of somebody trapped in their own mind after a traumatic head injury. Our mother sits by our comatose body, clutching our hand. The doctors, however, couldn't wake us up, so our mother stole our body from the hospital and started her own tests. You see all those pins I asked you to stick in your head for later? We're pulling them out now. Well, with these new words, we can combine the words corpse and stolen to get mom and hospital. Combining mom and hospital, you get guilt. After this accident, our mother, grief and guilt-ridden, drops everything to apply her research of knowledge of paleontology, the science and potential of fossils, and her background in chemical engineering to try and bring back her baby girl. Remember again when we asked if we died. Our mother claimed you were in a coma. They weren't giving you the care you needed. I had to take matters into my own hands. The resentful voice didn't believe this, but fitting it with the narrative that she stole our body from the hospital to begin her own treatment, while our mom's story isn't the whole story, it seems to fit. She obsessed over that fossil of the Morella splendens for an entire summer, taking no time to cook, rest, and barely even eat. A fossil which was not only extremely common in the Burgess Shale, but in a deposit site which is known to contain a notable amount of preserved soft tissue. All this work I've done so we can fix our family. That fossil drove a wedge between her and her only daughter, the only person she had left in the world, and pushing her away seems to have pushed Nima to an extreme action. When we combine words like Morella and mom, we get guilt and experiment. When we combine Morella and Nima, we get rebirth. Following that train, Nima and rebirth gives us monster. Combining monster with Morella gives us parasite. Now let's pull an old, strange word out of our vocab bank that you might not have acquired unless you were really just slamming things together. Zombie. When you combine the word zombie with the word parasite, you get Nima. Which brings me to what's happening to us as of now. I theorize that during the events of the demo, and what is projected to be happening in the events of a full release, is that our mother is experimenting on us. More specifically, on our corpse. Operating on our brain, either implanting soft tissue from the Morella fossils, or some other scientific hubris to try and revive us. That strange feeling we get, that paralyzing fear of sharks during the second interrogation, the feeling that wants to crawl back into the fossil that views the Burgess Shale as home. I think that feeling is the parasite Mom plants in us, a piece of the Morella splendens, filling that gap that was destroyed during our attempt in the river. But why Morella splendens specifically? Possibly because there's so many of them in the shale that it gives her a lot of sample sizes to work with in case of failed tests. Besides that, I can't really say for sure yet. Some evidence to support this theory, that she's cutting apart our corpse, taking us apart, and then putting us back together again? A flash of a memory you get around the first interrogation of our stone-faced mother standing over us, holding a knife designed for cutting flesh and organs. At first, I thought this might have been a paring knife or a fillet knife, for fish, or maybe she was cooking us dinner. But then I realized what it was far more likely to be: a scalpel. And as she cuts into us, she's applying her scientific knowledge, fueled by grief, guilt, desperation, pride, and a need to fix the wrong she's done to put you back together. To put the family back together. She implants into you a piece of some soft tissue recovered from the Burgess Shale from the Morella splendens. As for who the second voice in her head belongs to, I have several theories. I'm not super confident in them yet, but here they are. First, I believe that the monstrous, violent voice in her head could be the parasite. Remember the word associations from before, about how words like Nima, parasite, rebirth, monster, and Morella are all connected. Our mom is trying to rebirth us through a parasite recovered from soft tissue found in the Morella. However, I have reason to suspect that during the early parts of the experiments, our mom screwed up. When we first wake up, she's hesitant to approach us. She's scared of us, to come close enough to hug or console us. She's not afraid to show affection because we might not be her Nima. Rather, she's afraid of us because she's made a monster. A monster which I believe at one point waking up wasn't anything close to Nima, but rather a wild animal, and tried to kill her. And in a panic, our mom had to put us down in a much less gentle way than even what we see during the demo. I think after waking up the first time, we attacked her, causing her to reach for the nearest blunt object in order to put us down. The fossil. Where our use of the word trapped sends Nima into a wild rage, screaming, bashing the desk, and acting out in the most violent display we see of her throughout the entire demo. Remember that when we wake up at the start of the demo, we are tied up, bound, and restrained. Our mom says it's to keep us grounded so that we don't pass out and hurt ourselves. But with this new theory in mind, an alternative explanation is much more clear and dreadful. We're not tied up for our own safety. We're tied up for hers, so that when we wake up, we don't immediately try to bash her skull in with a rock. This parasitic side inhabiting our mind still remembers our mom and how it treats it, harboring an ever-increasing resentment and disdain towards her, and encourages us to betray her at any given moment. It's also why I think the voice has such a visceral, fearful reaction to a shark plush during that same portion. It's primal and it's not very intelligent. It doesn't recognize that it's just a toy and freezes up. One final piece of evidence for this. Combining Infect and Nima, you get Mind and Parasite. Combining these gives us Infect again, in addition to Home and Manipulation. I do have my issues with this theory, however, for a couple of reasons. One reason is that during my autistic deep dive into paleontology, I learned that the Morella splendens is an arthropod from the Middle Cambrian period, which was roughly 508 million years ago. The problem arises when you compare that timeline to that of sharks, where the earliest shark teeth only go back about 410 million years ago to the early Devonian period. Even if you throw out the teeth and go even further back to the earliest sharks we have on record, you still only buy another 40 million years to the late Ordovician period. Sharks might be older than trees, but they are not older than sea bugs. So timeline-wise, there is virtually zero overlap between Morella splendens and any species of shark, offering no explanation for why that voice would have such a fearful recognition. So why is that voice so terrified of the shark plush? Well, I don't know. Another reason is that the voice, even during the crash out sequence of the trapped prompt, urges us to stay in character. Despite its earlier desires to bash our mother's head in with a rock, it tries restraining us even when we are actually mad enough to do what it wants. So for those reasons, I think it's more likely to be something else. That something else could be that the voice is a fragment of old Nima, the depressed Nima who hated our mother and tried to take her own life, who wants to make her suffer for all the grief she's inflicted on us. But because this version of Nima has been pushed to the back of consciousness, it has to share a space with the parasite put in Nima's brain to fill the empty space created by the coma. Or at least she has to try and wrestle her way to the front of the conscious realm, leaving signs behind for Nima, the parasite or whoever's driving, to discover and remember for next time she wakes up. Remember back to the diary in her locker. Do not trust the woman. Kill her. This, I feel, is from a past attempt of Nima, one who pieced together enough fragments to conclude that your mother could not be trusted, but realized that it was too late for her. So, before she could be lobotomized, she wrote this message down and locked it away with a code that only she would know, no matter how many times she got reset. Old Nima has to try and fight for influence and fill the gaps herself, to get new Nima to remember the horrible things Mom did to us, to not trust Mom, and to kill her. Old Nima wants revenge, but most of all, she wants freedom. Perhaps that may be an ending in the full release, but for now, locking our mom in the bathroom or bashing her skull in with a funny rock is not currently an option. Believe me, I tried. When we begin the game, our first words we hear are, "It worked." And upon failure, the last words we hear are, "There's always next time." She's bringing us back from the dead, as immediately following "It worked," we hear, "You're breathing," clearly indicating we weren't breathing before this. This is not our mother's first time performing an autopsy on us, operating on our corpse and then putting us back together. She will keep trying over and over, interrogating us, testing us, and experimenting on us until she gets her Nima back. Her Nima, not the Nima, the one who died, the one who was resentful and depressed, but the ideal Nima, the good and happy Nima who did not resent her, who did not favor the dad over her. But before she can get that, she must once more put us under the knife and try again. Meanwhile, it's up to us to find the truth out ourselves, to use what knowledge we can glean to discover not only who we are, what really happened to us, but who we're going to become. There still remains a myriad of questions and theories still left from this game that I am absolutely going to consider and look into if and when it fully releases. Questions like, who is the fourth family member? During the first round of questioning, Nima can ask about the rest of the family, but our mother says, it's just us two. Nima objects, that's not true, there's two others, aren't there? Our mother affirms this, saying, there was once, but now it's just us two. We've already put together that our dad is dead, due to word associations like dad and age being death, as well as other dialogue of our mother flat out telling us he isn't coming back, such as our response to the shark during the second interrogation. But who is this unnamed fourth member of the family? It could be our pet James Pond, but I'm not so sure. I mean, when people ask me how many family members I have, as much as I love my dog, I typically don't include them in the census when giving an answer to this question, let alone a goldfish. Although it is worth considering that when you combine family and fish, you do get James Pond. So maybe he is the fourth member, as well as the fact to take into consideration just how much Nima loved fish and marine biology as a whole. So who knows? I also doubt it's our friend from the retirement home Pearl, as the question explicitly concerns family, not friends. However, I am aware that the term family can be very subjective for some people and cultures, so maybe a friend can be considered family in this case, especially for someone who is so lonely like Nima. I know I consider some friends family, so who's to say it's not true here? All I'm saying is that the spirit of the question feels literal to me, but as always, I could be wrong. Nima had to drop the swim team because they moving away from their city in Vancouver in British Columbia. When and why did the Lee family move away from Vancouver? Mom was obsessed with her work there at the Burgess Shale. It doesn't make sense yet why'd she so willingly leave. Our dad is 100% dead. That, I feel like, is a fact. But it's never explained fully or even partially how he died. How did our dad die? And one last major question that no matter how hard I tried to answer, I just couldn't figure it out. And that question was who we are throughout the game. Were we a parasite, some remnant of Nima, or a mimic based on the Morella Splendens? Am I one of several personalities fragmented in Nima's mind? Am I Nima? What do you think? I think that if you've made it this far and you've enjoyed the video, if you haven't already, please go play the demo for yourself. Experiment with words and concepts and come back to me with your findings. I would love to hear some of your guys' theories or discoveries that I may have missed during my own expeditions, or explanations I might otherwise not have considered. I do understand and admit there are lots of holes still left in this theory, or maybe some dialogue options that contradict an assumption or two that I'm just not aware of yet or haven't taken into consideration. And that's okay. Again, this is just a theory and also just a demo. A demo I will be again leaving a link to down in the description below. Or if you're feeling social on that same Steam page, you can head over to the Discord and join the discussion and theorize with other people who are also passionate about this game. Because the more people that wishlist this game and interact in the community in general, the louder the message gets to the developers that people want to see more, and the more likely it is to eventually release. So please, head over to Steam and wishlist this game. I am no longer asking. The Discord itself is pretty active even this early on, and I gotta give them credit. Reading the theories thread gave me a lot of leads to follow with information that I completely missed even after 4 or 5 runs. This game also gives me very strong Who's Lila vibes, for anyone who understands what I'm referencing. That idea of imitation, amnesia, and a fragmented sense of self. It's extremely well done here, is all I'm trying to say, and I cannot wait to see what direction it goes in. Meanwhile, I will be over here on life support, dying with anticipation until the full game comes out and I can finally tear into it myself. Once it does, expect a follow-up video. Or 2. However long they take me. Until then, thank you so much for choosing to spend this time with me today. Take it easy, everybody.